Welcome to the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast presented by TrainerRoad. I am Coach Jonathan Lee. We are today with Hannah Otto from Scott Bikes, competitive cyclist, Pearl Izumi, Shimano, Fox, all the different brands. Hannah, I'm stoked to have you on. Last time we had you on, and by the way, if you're wondering, Hannah Otto is a professional gravel racer, mountain bike racer, endurance athlete in general, triathlete background, has won the Leadville 100, had set the FKT on the Cocopelli Trail, does a bunch of things like that. But more importantly, Hannah's an incredible person. You can follow her on social media, get an insight into what it's like to be a professional athlete. That's what we're going to do today. A good portion of this is going to be getting into your experience and how you have managed everything with your training and all that stuff. You did Mediterranean Epic in the spring. And then you had a pretty decent sized window in between then and Sea Otter. Now the Mediterranean Epic is a stage race. You were coming in, I think that was your first race of the year. Mm-hmm. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah. So you come in, you do that stage race, you probably experience a big boost in fitness. And then you have kind of this, what was it, a 6 week, maybe longer?
About 6 weeks, yeah.
Okay. What in the world did you do with yourself for 6 weeks, right? Do you go back to base training? Did you go, did you try to ride the wave? Because us amateurs would do that, and we would probably just be so stoked. It's we just got this new fitness, and it's a new toy that we want to play with and use. How did you structure your training in between then and then a very consequential, important thing, the start of the Lifetime Grand Prix?
Yeah, I do think it's a really delicate balance and would be really hard. If you did say peak for the stage race or even just prioritize it, if you go through all the phases of training, get to the Med Epic, then yeah, what do you do for the next 6 weeks? But for me, the balancing act, and it's a lot harder said than done actually, but is going into the Med Epic knowing that this is not my focus event. This is exactly what it is. It's the first race of the season. And so going into the Med Epic, I did a lot of base training before we started pushing up, building up my FTP, my threshold. But going into the Med Epic, I probably did 1 or 2 VO2 workouts. That was it.
Wow.
And we did them purely just as, hey, remember how hard this is so that you're not shocked when you get there.
Can I stop you really quick
yeah.
to recognize the discipline that takes? Because that really shows that you were treating it not you weren't letting it become something that it wasn't. And that is really hard for us amateurs because we're following a training plan and then our friend says, hey, are you coming to the crit this week? And we're like, no, I've just been doing base training. And suddenly the rest of our workouts that were scheduled to be maybe low aerobic or something else, we're doing anaerobic every single day to prep for this crit that isn't even a C race. It's just something that might replace, a hard workout.
Yeah.
So that is very, and I know you're a professional, so I get it. Don't get me wrong, but
it's still so
I want
hard.
to point it out.
And the amount of times I would call my coach and be like, hey, so are we going to be ready for the Med Epic? And every time he'd be like, define ready. We will be ready in the way that we talked about, which is ready enough to make it a quality first race this season. If you go in unfit, it's not really quality because you're not racing at the pointy end and you're not getting to practice all the things you need to practice. But my goal wasn't to go there and to be in my best fitness. My goal was to go there, use it as really good training, as really good practice, to see, in fact, where I was lacking and make sure the things that I was lacking were the things that we had yet to work on. If I left there and said, hey, my high end feels like it's holding me back, perfect. That is what we're going into. So to answer your question, I came back from the Mediterranean Epic and I did pretty much resume my training as scheduled, but I still had so much room in that training to keep moving forward. So we started focusing on that VO2, especially knowing that Sea Otter would be pretty punchy. And then we also worked on more specificity. So for me, that looks a lot like motor pacing. I'm I was in Tucson, so I got to do the shootout a lot, riding the gravel bike specifically, and then working on any areas of opportunity that we identified in that stage race. And for me, that's something even as simple as Cadence. We noticed that that was a place that I had some movement where I could improve. And so we started focusing on those things.
Do you mind if I ask, and we can cut this out in post, but what did you want to change with your cadence?
I need to increase my cadence. So I have a tendency, I'm just much more comfortable at a lower cadence.
Same.
Yeah, it's just what I naturally go towards. And especially when I first touch those VO2 efforts in the season, that's when it becomes really exposed. And so we usually have this moment kind of every year where it's like, okay, let's go back. Let's focus on cadence. Let's do cadence drills. Let's prioritize that. And then I usually notice a direct correlation between an increase in cadence and an improvement in my VO2 intervals as well.
That's an interesting correlation. I feel like I've seen the same. But it's hard for me to separate it. Whenever I'm doing criterium racing or road racing, my cadence is very high, relatively speaking, compared to when I'm mountain bike racing. I think some of that is to be expected because you need to maintain a slower cadence to maintain traction all throughout the pedal stroke on like variable terrain. So I get that. But there is something to be said for intentional work on cadence. And you don't just get it from going out and racing road or something like that. You can get it from drills, It's good on you. You mentioned bikes there. What were you spending? Because, it's always hard to separate Instagram from reality. When I look at your Instagram, I was like, she's on a gravel bike, she's on a road bike, she's on her mountain bike, mixing it all up. And you had this big gravel race of Sea Otter coming up. Did you spend the majority of time on your gravel bike before Sea Otter? Like after Med Epic, was it just like, okay, onto the gravel bike?
It was definitely a big shift. I would say I spent about 50% of my time on the gravel bike, and then I split the other 50%, so 25 on the mountain, 25 on the road. For me, you're just never going to get me off the mountain bike. I love it way too much. It's too much fun. That's what I love spending my time doing. So I'm always going to make time for that 25%. I do think the skills also pay off. The road bike, doing the shootout, doing motor pacing, that's just the bike I'm going to use for those type of things. And then the rest of my workouts, interval workouts, like those really long days in the saddle, that's when I would use the gravel bike all the way leading into Sea Otter. And I was also, because all my bikes are new this year to me, I was spending a lot of time doing new testing as well, seeing exactly how I wanted things, testing a lot of different equipment. And ultimately, that feels like a very frustrating thing to say. I was doing a lot of testing, given how Sea Otter turned out, which we will, I'm sure, talk about.
We'll get into. Stay tuned for that. This is, you can go to Hannah's Instagram where Hannah shares a lot of details about the setup changes that she's had this year and different details on technical stuff too. So go check that out. I want to ask you about Tucson really quick. This is your first time going down to Tucson for like this extended winter training block. I think you're still there as well. I could be wrong, but I think you're still there.
Yep.
What did you gain from that? Like, what do you feel like was positive about it? Anything you'll change for the early season next year?
Yeah, I really loved it. It was my first year spending the whole winter in Tucson. Compared to where I normally spend the winter, either in Salt Lake or Palm Springs, there was a huge variety in terrain, which I think was really good for just like the entirety of the season to spend time on different types of terrain. I could really prioritize each and every ride, a focus and a goal being, okay, today I'm going to focus on riding flat roads, or I'm going to go to Lemon. I'm going to work on my climbing. I really enjoyed the chunky mountain biking. And then ironically, I'm going to say I really enjoyed the shootout. Going into it, I didn't really think that was going to be something that I would ever say in this capacity, but I do think it actually made a pretty big difference in my lead up to this year, just having that opportunity to go there and do like a little race sim every weekend. It was pretty sweet to be able to, without consequence, try new strategies, test things out, see what worked, see what didn't. And I think that really built a robustness in my strategy on the bike, actually, which is a piece that I don't really think I've ever worked on intentionally outside of true racing before. So that was definitely pretty cool.
And for those that don't know, the Tucson Shootout is a famous group ride that's really a race ride, and it happens every Saturday morning. And in the middle of the winter, or like late winter, early spring, it's not uncommon to have everyone from World Tour riders to professional mountain bikers to gravel racers to everything in there, triathletes. It's very cool. It's an incredible ride. So Hannah, Sea Otter, you mentioned on your Instagram that your secret weapon is your smile. But I want to ask you how, because I read your social post. Like, how do you smile? Because after after your race, you posted the fact that, because I was looking at the results and I'm like, Hannah must have crashed. Just like looking at the live timing. And then afterward, you had a mechanical that was affecting you the whole race. And I don't think you knew about it the whole race. What was going through your mind? You had to have been like, so if it was me, let me not reflect me on you. Let me just be me. If it was me, I'd be like, okay, what did I do wrong? Like, how in the world, like, should I question absolutely everything I've done? What happened? And I don't know if you can share the mechanical issue. If you can't, we should all be understanding and recognize that. But if you can share the mechanical issue, we're all ears. But then on top of that, how did you manage this? Something holding you back and you didn't even know it was holding you back. You just knew that, like, you weren't where you expected to be whatsoever, even though your numbers were still good.
Yeah. There's so many things I want to say. So buckle in, everyone. I think, so first of all, what happened to me during the race, one very clear thing happened. I got a nail in my tire. That was like a very clear moment that was an obvious setback. The other thing that was kind of this mysterious issue the whole race was I ran a tire that was too wide for my frame. As we all know, everything's pushing towards wider tires. So this winter, I did a lot of testing to see what I could pull off, what tires I could run. And I did a lot of testing with this wide tire. It seemed to work, but it didn't. I didn't account for tire swelling. I didn't account for frame flex. I just didn't account for the wobbles in the tire, variability. Like, there's so many things that go into this, and I take responsibility for that, and it's frustrating and, quite frankly, a little bit embarrassing, but it is what it is. The tire was too wide, and it rubbed on the frame the entire race. It rubbed on the inside of that rear triangle the whole way, causing extra drag. And when I would stand and put extra weight into the pedals, it smashed up against the frame. So when
it was like somebody would put the brakes on.
So exactly. So not only was it rubbing, but then when you stand to try and accelerate or attack or stay with the group, I would actually go slower. So it was this total mental just disaster of standing up to sprint and being dragged backwards and feeling like, what is happening? Something is so wrong. So it was very frustrating. I didn't know what was happening, like you said. I think this is a moment where a lot of the work that I've done with Sarah Enzo Mental Performance did pay off. And I think that is one takeaway that I can be proud of, in that when you race, and I think this is an important takeaway for everyone, regardless of the situation, racing is not the time to analyze. Analyzing is for after. Racing is for doing. And so a lot of the time, I know for me, as someone who is intellectual and likes to have all the answers, it's so easy in the middle of races, be it this mechanical or something else. It's very easy to be making little notes in your mental notebook of I'm not as good at this, need to work on this, all throughout the race.
Welcome to my brain.
Yeah, it's not helpful. And so as I was going through this situation, these thoughts are popping into my head oh my gosh, I'm not this, I'm not XYZ, I'm not. And at a certain point, you just have to shut it down and replace it with the thought of, this is going differently than I anticipated. How can I adapt to that? And so for the large majority of the race, that was my approach. At a certain point, it became abundantly clear that, quote unquote, something was wrong. I mean, like you said, looking at where I'm at in the field, it's like, okay, even on a bad day, this is not what I would anticipate.
Right.
And so at that point, I accepted exactly that. Something is wrong. We'll figure out what it is later. I just need to finish what I'm doing right now, focus on what I can do right now, and we'll deal with the rest at another time.
Oh, man, good on you. Because that would be really tricky to not spiral. And like, good that you're able to catch that. And kind of pull yourself away from that danger. Afterward, when you're figuring it all out, how do you manage that though? Because in one respect, it's almost like you feel like you want to throw away the race, right? In the sense that it's just like, okay, well, that technicality almost like shifted the baseline of all my learnings to a point where they aren't even relevant anymore.
Yeah.
Do you look back and take something away from a race like this? Other than obviously, like you mentioned, like the tire test and that sort of thing.
Yes and no. I mean, for me, largely the most important thing I think I can do is move on. I think that this is a much bigger lesson, and I think it's a lesson that everyone listening can take away. No one's immune to bad luck. Like, everybody will face a challenge at some point or another, and it's up to you how you respond to that. And I mean that on a big scale and a small scale. When I crossed the finish line in Otter, I was many, 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 many places beyond what I wanted to be. I was very unhappy. And the second I crossed the finish line, I had about 8 cameras on me taking photos, asking me for a quote on what happened in the race, and I still didn't know. I just feel like that's important.
How do you answer?
For people.
How do you answer in that moment?
I'm still processing because that's what I was doing. And I was upset, and I am upset. And in the privacy of my own home, I did throw a tantrum. And I think it's important for people to hear that because, like you said, like, how do you smile? Like, I smile because that is my consistent emotion. But we can experience 2 emotions at once. And so it's okay to be angry and sad, but you can't let that temporary feeling take away from your consistent joy. And so I can temporarily feel angry and sad, but I can still smile because at the root of everything, I am still happy. I'm still happy to be racing my bike. I'm still happy to be out here. I'm still thankful for the day. And after letting that sadness exist, it is time to move on and be happy. And dwelling in that sadness or anger doesn't make it any better. And I think there's this connotation or this really negative approach that sometimes we have in racing that we have to punish ourselves by continuing to exist in that frustration. Like, oh, I don't deserve to be happy, or I don't deserve to move on from this result until I do something better. But I'm here to tell you that punishing yourself with that does not mean you want it more. All it means is that emotion is going to continue to hold you back. And so my ability to move on doesn't mean I care any less. It doesn't mean I want it any less. It doesn't mean I'm less frustrated when I cross that finish line. It just means that I won't let that single negative experience hold me back from the future positive ones. And in my experience, very few people even remember the start of the year by the time we get to the end. And so it's my choice in that moment to decide, okay, I am going to move on to the next one. I'm going to focus on the next one. And I also think it's important for people to hear that, like I'm saying, like, that temporary feeling shouldn't impact your consistent joy or your consistent emotion. And the reason that I can have that consistent emotion is because bike racing is what I do. It's not who I am. And my identity is not entirely wrapped up on the bike. And I don't think that makes me any weaker. I think it makes me stronger because that means I'm harder to break. I will not be so impacted by these relatively small issues or these relatively just things that, like I said, it happens to everyone. And if that's not your be-all, end-all, it's not going to break you. It's just going to be a little bump on the road. And so that's my encouragement to everybody out there. Like I said, you might be listening to this thinking, I don't know, whatever you're thinking, Hannah's on one. But you will have a bad race at some point, whether it's mechanical, whether it's a crash, whether it's just a bad day. And you will experience emotion about it and you will have a choice. And I just encourage you to really dive into what those feelings are. Like, are you experiencing sadness about the day that's normal? Or are you questioning what it means about you and your identity and everything you've done up to that point? Like, one bad day does not mean all your training's bad. And this is one of the things that I see athletes make the mistake about all the time. You have one bad day and you go back to the drawing board and you change absolutely everything. This is such a mistake. Like, stay the course. Like, sometimes racing is just about who gives up last. And so don't fall into that trap of letting this trip you up, of letting this hold you back, of letting that thing become an issue that ultimately drags you back even farther than it needs to.
Well said, Hannah. Very well said. I have nothing to add to that. That was great. I want to move forward with you and through the rest of the Lifetime Grand Prix now. You're not where you thought you'd be in terms of the point standings.
Understatement.
Yeah. So do you have a strategy change? I mean, it's kind of like, I almost wonder if this is a silly question because it's like, it's not like you were going to show up and try 5 out of 10 at a race or something this year. You're going to always give it your all at all of them. But is there any change in how you approach the rest of the season now?
I do think it's a great question because, again, I think it goes back to some of what I just talked about because, yeah, oh my gosh, when those standings came out and I saw them, I literally felt sick. Like I wanted to throw my phone across the room. But then again, I sat with that emotion and was like, why? What does this change? You already knew it was a bad day. You already knew you had bad luck. You already knew that you made a mistake. You were already going to do your best at every single event anyways. It doesn't change anything. So exactly that. It doesn't change anything. I was going to do every event anyways. I was going to put my best foot forward in every event anyways. Sure, you could look at it and say there's some additional pressure on the events ahead. But again, additional pressure doesn't change me doing my best. So
you were going to try your best anyway. You were going to like do your best, put your best forward, execute the best you could anyway. So it's not like the additional pressure is not effective.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just at this point, the season is so long. Believe me, I played it out in my head so many ways of like forecasting this, forecasting that, looking at the results. Who will do well at this race? Who will do well at that race? Well, I don't really think anybody thought I would place where I placed at Otter. So far be it from me. So far be it from me to think where anybody else will place at any other race either. Like if one crazy thing can happen, another crazy thing can happen. And if we've learned anything in the Grand Prix, not only can it, but it will. And so I'm just waiting. I'm just waiting to see how it all plays out because every year it's exciting. But yeah, I'm approaching every race like at my best. And I also stand by what I've said in the past, which to me, winning one of these large events in the Grand Prix is of bigger prestige than standing on the overall podium. And so I feel like, while of course I want to place high in the overall, I also want the individual wins, and that never changes. So
you're like a bounty hunter. You want yeah, exactly. You want to take the big prize. So, and there's a chance to do that every single race.
Exactly.
What is next for you? Are you going to do, there's BWR well, as of people listening to this right now, this will be published next week. So BWR California, there's Whiskey Off-Road. They're in Prescott. That's a mountain bike race by Epic Rides. a great one. And then there's Traca after that over in Europe. And then we kind of have a bit of a break, but there are some other races that we could do, but kind of a bit of a break until Unbound. What is your next race?
I'm racing the Whiskey 50 this weekend in
Sweet.
Prescott. So I'm actually already up in Prescott right now, prepping.
Oh, cool.
And I'm super excited. The Whiskey 50 is one of my favorite events. I love mountain biking. I think the Whiskey 50 is like one of the last best mountain bike races in the US. So yeah,
It
I'm
is.
super excited.
It really is. Like if you're a mountain biker that wants a proper like adventure 1-day race, I'm not sure there's a better one that's real core mountain biking in the whole country. It's amazing. So
yeah.
And Todd and the crew there just put on such good events. That's cool. I was going to ask you about Unbound training, but I'm not going to. We're going to skip that one because I want people to kind of like, number one, I want to leave that's your competitive advantage. We need to just, expose everything like that. But then also maybe that gives us something to talk about in post there. I want to go straight into Victor's question. Victor says, I'm a self-coached athlete who has worked with a coach over the past 4 seasons. And by the way, if you enjoyed that conversation with Hannah here, you can give it a thumbs up on YouTube. You can rate the podcast on Spotify or subscribe on YouTube. Both of those things are hugely helpful. And you can drop questions, just like Victor did. You can drop questions down below into the podcast or into the comments on YouTube or on Spotify. And we will look through the questions and pick some every week to discuss. Victor again says, I'm a self-coached athlete who has worked with a coach over the past 4 seasons. Even though the season is just getting started, I've been having the best race performances of my life at 40 years old this year. I've done, and forgive me, there's a very loud lawnmower directly outside my window. I've done 3 races in which I normally finish mid-pack, but I've been on the podium for a 1 second place and then 2/3 every time. The biggest difference is in my training. I've always targeted this series, so I start specific hill repeats and interval work on January for the first race in April. But this year, I'm coaching myself. I've decided to just focus on raising my FTP instead. My typical FTP every year was 246, and this year it isn't massively higher at only 257, but I somehow can attack and respond like never before, so I'm not getting dropped on hills. How does this make sense if I haven't been doing my typical repeats and intervals? What's going on in my body that makes all of this possible? That's a great question because it kind of goes against like the basic, at first glance, it goes against the basic tenets of training, right, Hannah? Where specificity is where you build that sort of repeatability in your ability to attack, respond, and be dynamic in a race. What are your thoughts on this one, Hannah? I definitely have some too, but what are yours?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we'll go back and forth on this because there's so many different avenues in which this is occurring. I think, one, it depends on what you've done to raise your FTP. Do we have any data on
No,
Victor?
they don't.
Okay.
They don't have a TrainerRoad account, or at least that wasn't noted. And I looked up just the word Victor or the name Victor, and of course, there's like endless pages of Victor. So I don't know.
Okay.
But no, when they say they're a self-coached athlete, I know a lot of people might consider themselves self-coached with TrainerRoad, even though TrainerRoad's their coach. But I don't think they have an account here, or else they probably would have mentioned it.
Okay. Yeah, I think, first of all, it depends what you're doing to raise your FTP as to how and why this is working. If raising your FTP to you just means like because previously you're doing a lot of high intensity, now maybe you're doing longer base build type of stuff, you are physically making changes in your body, like increasing cardiac stroke volume, you're increasing mitochondria, you're increasing capillary density, like you're physically making changes that are improving your ability to be an athlete. If you're focusing more on like sweet spot and actual like straight up FTP intervals, you also have to think about what FTP is doing in these races, which is when your FTP is higher, every other effort becomes easier. It doesn't really matter where on the spectrum it is because it's a lower percentage of your FTP. Even if it's VO2, now the attack is 110% of your FTP instead of 120. If you're sitting in a group, now you're riding tempo instead of before you were riding sweet spot. So it's kind of muting the entire race, which is either just A, making it easier all around so you're sticking in longer, or B, you might be noticing, like you said, I think something about attacking like never, you're able to attack like never before. You have more energy.
Attack and respond.
Yeah, you have more energy now because you're using less energy to be in that group. So you have more matches at the end of the race. And this is something we see in racing all the time. The person who wins the sprint isn't always the best sprinter. Sometimes it's just the person who's the least tired. And so you're approaching this from a variety of angles and seeing results as an outcome.
A good analogy for this is a wave pool. When I take my daughter into the wave pool, and she's 2 years old, she's very tiny, I take her into the wave pool. We do not get many steps into the wave pool until she does not want to go any further.
That's
because
great.
those little waves are like quite tall. They go up to her chest, right? Whereas on me, they're at my knees, and I can go a lot further. The attacks are like the waves, and all the hard, spiky efforts, they're like the waves. And if you're taller, you're not bothered by it as much. And being taller is like raising your FTP. And this is maybe one of the, I think a lot of people misunderstand. We've talked about this recently over the past couple of weeks, or a few weeks really, about durability and some misconceptions with the whole thing. Great way to make yourself durable is to raise that FTP, because then, like you said, it makes everything hurt a little less. It makes it so that you can arrive at the end of that race fresher and then be able to do more. So I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. I've seen a lot of athletes maybe lean a little too heavily into the specificity in some respects, but then I know this seems paradoxical, but also drift further away from it, while all the while thinking that they are being more specific. And here's how we typically see it. You get closer to your big race, so you start racing more, which means you lose intentional specificity, and instead you might have unpredictable or random specificity. But then if you do that, it might not actually be specific to the event. You've added in 1 to 2 little races, whether it's a Zwift race here or an in-person, like in real life race somewhere else. And then you might do one interval workout where it's is intentional, but you're so worked from doing too much intensity that you're not able to actually achieve the intentional structure and changes you want from that workout. So it's like this thought where in your mind, you're like, I'm being super specific, but you're actually not able to drive the sort of adaptations that you need with that very structured training. So, sometimes it just works out that we do a lot of racing, and when we do a lot of racing, we become dynamic and it works really well. But the whole point of structured training is to make performance a bit more predictable, right? And to be like, no, I can make sure that I'm ready to perform on day X. And this is something that I see a lot of athletes do. So perhaps, Victor, you might have been in a situation with your coach where maybe you guys were doing a lot of specific sort of interval work, but also maybe doing too much of it, or doing too much racing as well. It actually doesn't take a whole lot, right, Hannah, to specify, to sharpen the blade. I think in our minds, a lot of us think that, okay, in base training, I do base sort of work. And then after that, I do an entirely different sort of work. And then it's entirely different when I'm specializing. But in reality, it's more like you're changing out 1 workout a week or 2 workouts a week, and that's it. It's not changing up the entire thing. Instead, it's similar in a lot of respects.
Yeah. You also can't, or shouldn't, maybe I should say, do that many weeks of VO2 block in a row, which is kind of what I'm hearing here, like specific hill repeats and interval work. If you're just stacking weeks upon months of VO2 style work, you're just getting dull and you're not reaching the highest end, which is what that work requires in order to see the improvement. And so you could also view that as your body needs novel stimulus in order to improve. So if you're constantly doing the same workouts, it's nice to sometimes do the same workouts because you can measure this improvement. But if it's the same all the time, your body finds these hacks to get through it. Like if you ever go to the gym and do the same workout every week, you're thinking, oh my gosh, my quads are getting so strong. And then you change that exercise and your quads are wrecked. This is the example. Like you got really good at that exercise, which increased strength, but it didn't maximize strength. And so we need to create different novel stimulus in order to surprise the body, because that's what happens in racing. Like maybe you got really, really good at shuttling lactate, but you weren't that good at the anaerobic efforts. Maybe you weren't that good at the low intensity aerobic efforts. You just had this one thing that you were super specialized in. And racing is much beyond a singular energy system or body experience.
That's right. Great point. And that probably also leads into, if this works right now, don't think that this is just what you have to do for the rest of your life.
Yes,
like,
exactly.
It should evolve. It should be periodized. That's the point of periodization, is that it allows your body, yes, to be able to experience progressive overload and then recover from it at a mesocycle perspective. So we're talking, months over months and years over years rather than just, day by day. But on top of that as well, it allows your body to experience novel stimulus. And periodizing your training, that's like a key thing, like Hannah said, is you're going to get unique adaptations and be able to like shift little limiters or blocks because of doing that. But you mentioned a good point. I think that maybe people misunderstand the fact that if you're doing a lot of steady state, let's just say, it seems like probably sweet spot to threshold style work, I assume, just because that would stand at odds with this hill repeats in specific intervals. If you're doing that, it's not that you just get good only at doing that very specific thing. You're building muscular endurance and a level of aerobic efficiency when you're doing long, extended periods of effort at that level. You're really driving a potent stimulus to your body, and it's going to make itself much more efficient. So like Hannah said, there are things that are gained through training those energy systems that transcend just that power zone. It will go across all the range and help you across the board. It's one of the reasons why I like that sweet spot and threshold area is so productive, and it's such a staple in the majority of training that you see. So that's my thought as to there. There's also a totally different side of things, Victor. What if last year you just accumulated a certain amount of like learning now where you're just like, you're able to read a race better and be more dynamic? Who knows? But
excellent point.
On the fitness side, you're not alone in feeling this. This is actually pretty common for a lot of athletes. If their FTP goes up, racing feels relatively easier. Doesn't mean that it's going to be a walk in the park, of course, but it feels relatively easier. It's because you can take a high wave right now and you're totally fine. So, whereas before it would completely take you under. So, Elena's question. I've been saving this one. Question for Hannah next time she's hosting. How do you manage your social media use on race weeks? Do you adjust it in any way? Any other tips you have to stay focused without spiraling into anxiety caused by obsessing over every detail? Probably a lot of people are feeling attacked by this one, Elena, because you're not alone. A lot of us have a similar thing where we can just spiral in that sort of scenario. What do you do, Hannah?
Man, I wish I had some really beautiful answer to this that just like solved all the issues, because I feel like this is an issue for everyone, myself included. It's really hard. And I think, some people do have hard and fast rules, like they stay off social media entirely. That might work for you. For me, I do try and limit my social media consumption during race week, but I don't have hard and fast rules. And maybe I would be benefited by some, but I also find to some extent it's important to not just bury my head in the sand. Like I do learn things listening to the social media throughout the week sometimes. Like maybe I didn't pre-ride part of the course and I'm seeing photos of muddy trails and I wouldn't have known otherwise. These can be actually valuable inputs that if you just like block yourself off because you can't handle it, you can ultimately hurt yourself with that as well. So for me, just like everything in life, it's about balance, it's about moderation, and it's about listening to your own emotions. So I do intake some social media because, like I said, I think it can actually inform you in some ways. But I also have to be honest with myself about those emotions. You can feel like, let's be honest, we can all feel when the spiraling starts. The issue is when the spiraling starts, we usually start scrolling faster, more, we start clicking on profiles, we start digging in, we start zooming in, right? That's the time to cut it off, because then you know, okay, this is doing more harm than good. I also think it's important to continually ground yourself. Like, one of the reasons we often spiral is because we think, oh, they're doing this, why am I not doing this? Or, oh, they've done this, why didn't I do this? And you have to go back to your confidence and understand that you're not doing this, or you haven't done this because you chose not to, because you believe that what you're doing is the best. I've had this happen before races before, where I've said, oh yeah, I'm running this chain ring, and someone gives me a look like, ooh. And my response is, just to be clear, I chose it. I had the option to run something else. I'm running this because I think it's best. And so it's important. That's not to like, oh, you know best. That's not at all what I'm saying. I'm saying to ground yourself in that confidence. If you want to change it, you have the option to change it. But you should sit back and see what they're running and not feel a threat, but rather just take it in as information, because you've already made your choices. And that goes for training as well. Just because someone did more doesn't mean they're better. You chose to do what you did because you think it's best for you. And so I think just continually grounding yourself in that confidence. And sometimes we do need that extra hit of confidence, and confidence comes from experience. So that's also a chance when we can look back and say, hey, this is a really good workout I did. Look at this training block. I worked really hard. And to pat yourself on the back for those things that you've already done, that you can say, hey, I deserve to be confident, because look at all of the incredible things I've already accomplished and already done. And look at all the work I've done to prep for this race. Like, build yourself up. Be proud of yourself leading into the race. So often we're so nervous leading into the race. What if we tried to just be proud of our preparation? And then lastly, I would say focus on those things that we can control. A lot of the time we feel anxiety when we lack control, when we feel like things are slipping away from our ability to change them. So change that narrative in your head and start focusing on and leaning into those things that you have control over at that point, like hydration, rest, fueling, the effort that you give. These are all things that can help recenter you, because you and you alone are in control of them.
That's fantastic advice. I think there's probably a different aspect to this too, right, Hannah? Where it's a huge area of study now with social media and our chemical reactions to social media, and just like the dopamine response and almost how we can become conditioned to that small dosage but repeated dosage of dopamine you get as you scroll, and you get to see what's next, and then it's an image, and then you get to see what next, and it's in a video, and it's this,
or
like,
even the dopamine that we get from people responding to us. Like, you posted and everyone likes it, and you're like, yeah, I'm the best. And that's great until it's not. Then you make a post and no one likes it, and you're like, what's wrong with me? What have I done wrong? Like, and as humans, we weren't designed for this constant hit and response and immediate dopamine, like, reaction, essentially.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off.
Right?
I've been reading a lot about this as well.
Yeah. And there's probably something to be said for an athlete to be in an ideal performance state. And we're talking like chemically speaking. And I'm obviously not a neuroscientist, people, so please don't come at me. But to have some sort of like a dopamine fast, so to speak, in the sense of like coming into an event like that, to make sure that you're not just carrying that steady tide of these almost like faux dopamine fixes that we get constantly through scrolling through social media. And instead that, allowing yourself to detach from that and perhaps achieve a bit more balance, where you aren't constantly getting this input and this feed of something coming in constantly. And instead you're able to kind of reach baseline. I know I personally feel if I'm like killing time and I'm just sitting there scrolling, and whenever I'm done with just like scrolling through stuff, I don't feel better. Like in the moment, I want to keep scrolling, but then afterward, I don't feel great. Like, I just
Mhm.
kind of feel like, ugh, like my brain's kind of like, it's kind of like it been under load in a way
Yeah.
that like isn't really helpful. And there's something to be said, I think, for athletes to be in a spot where they can have space to prepare how they want to prepare. And when you have that constant little drip of dopamine response coming in through scroll, it might actually remove that space that you need to be able to allow you to be adequately prepared. There's a lot of athletes that subscribe to those sort of theories for that reason as well. There's the complexities of how you view yourself in relation to everybody else. And then there's an additional layer of just chemically what it's all doing to you just by scrolling through something. Even if you just like your Instagram just has to do, I don't know, with like food and architecture and nothing to do with bikes, just scrolling through that in and of itself might also be challenging for you. It might also be a release, might be a spot for you to unplug. Who knows? It's probably different for everybody, but I
I made that
personally,
exact joke the other day to Clayton. Like, I was like, man, like sometimes you go on Instagram and you're just like, happy llama, bunny, cat video, some athlete's amazing workout that makes you smile for the rest of the day. And you're
yeah,
like, what
yeah,
happened? Like, everything was
yeah.
so good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I think that I bet there are probably a decent amount of athletes that if you were to look at like their explore page or like if their algorithm was exposed, it's probably they're trying their best to get away from whatever sport they're in, right?
Yes,
To just be,
yes. I've
consuming
been
other stuff.
reading Steve Magnus's most recent book, Win the Inside Game, and he starts out talking about social media and talking about this concept that we weren't as humans designed to compare ourselves on such a large scale that social media allows. Like in
Totally.
terms of fostering talent, um, especially in all levels, but especially thinking about in the youth space, is we were meant to challenge ourselves to be the fastest on the playground, the fastest on your street, on your block, the best rider in your town, the best singer in your school. And that was extremely motivating. And it fostered incredible talent because people kept working because they were comparing on a scale where they felt worthwhile. But now, when we constantly compare globally because social media allows that, we're pushed down in a way that doesn't feel as motivating because most people won't be the best globally, or at least not at first. And so it makes the gap from A to Z feel too big to jump through. And I think even as professional athletes, even for those of us who compete on the global scale, I still relate to this. It still rings true because in my day-to-day training, man, you do feel so good. Even as a professional athlete, you feel so good when you get that local Strava QOM. But then when you
Yeah.
compare globally, it's like, oh, maybe that my workout wasn't as good as this person's workout that day, and you can really push yourself down. And I think that's where, even as a professional athlete competing globally, it's important to remember to save those days for the races and not try and be the best in the world every single day. That's way too big of a task. Save it for the days that count.
Oh, great advice. And I think that's why, so this doesn't apply for Hannah because her job is literally to race against other people. But for the rest of us, we likely, I shouldn't say for the rest of us, but the majority of us listening, I assume, are not paid to race against other people. And for me, when I first started cycling, Strava was all consuming. It was absolutely everything. And I was just focused on KOMs, and that was it. And it was so cool and it was amazing. And I'm really grateful that Strava existed and was like right when I got into cycling, Strava was booming. It was really cool because that really hooked me strong. I can't think about, I don't have KOM notifications on. I haven't looked at a segment to see where I'm at since we beat Nate on a segment like 6 years ago or something. I haven't looked on that one segment that he had a KOM on. I think it was the only KOM and we took it. I have not looked, and I've made an intentional effort to recognize that, oh, that pulls me away from doing what's best for me. So I just don't do it. We're in a fortunate position where we don't have to, our paycheck isn't based on our performance. And that is something that, for athletes, professional athletes, it's a much more complicated scenario. It's very, what you said about scale and that we're not meant to be in this, like with such like global reach, that sort of thing. I agree. I'll say one wrong thing on the podcast, and then after that, I get 1,000 messages that week, and people are sending me like angry emails and threats and stuff. And it's like, I don't know how to, like, our words were also never meant to get to this scale. It's just weird. We've kind of broken everything, because that's not an effective conversation. None of you can talk to me, and I can just talk at you, and it's not effective. So, but such is the world. Carter's question, bike setup question for you. I grew up racing BMX, and like most BMX riders, my brake lever was rotated forward to the point of angling almost straight down. I only just started mountain biking after riding with friends in college and noticed nobody had their brake levers pointing down like that. And just this week, I saw the pro enduro rider Charlie Murphy has his levers almost perfectly flat, parallel to the ground. I saw that picture as well. They were effectively perfectly flat. So what is best, and how do you find the ideal lever angle? Hannah, what are your thoughts here?
It's going to be personal, but this makes complete sense because you're talking about different bikes, and those bikes are going to create different angles within your body. And that's what we're trying to do, is see if I can explain this with words. But basically, in my opinion, what you're trying to do with the brake levers is you're trying to put the lever in a position where it's right in line with your arm. And so on a
like
BMX
elbow,
bike,
so it'd be like elbow to wrist to finger to index finger, that would be a straight line effectively, or close to a straight line.
Yes, exactly.
Got it.
And so for a BMX rider, it makes sense because you're likely so far over that front wheel because your bike is smaller that it is going to point straight down, because your arms, with your body being more over that front wheel, are going to be, your elbow will be higher up, thus creating a more straight down approach. And then as the bike gets bigger and you move backwards on the bike, it will move that lever or that angle of the arm up. So on like an XC bike, it's probably going to be more, let me just tell you, I run mine at 46.7 degrees from flat, and I am not specific at all. So that makes sense for an XC bike. And then as you get even bigger, like you mentioned, an enduro bike, you're moving further back on the bike, your arm is getting flatter, and so the levers become flatter as well.
Yeah.
I hope that makes sense. Agree with, you can jump in.
Yeah. I completely agree with that approach, and I think that it becomes terrain dependent as well. So like with an enduro, for example, I know that top enduro racers, if this track is steeper, then they are going to run their levers higher up because they're further off the back, like you said, Hannah, because it's steeper terrain. They also, by the way, quite interestingly, will adjust their stack based on the average pitch of the terrain that they're on. Or really, better said, maybe not average pitch, but critical pitch. And this gets to a good point. For mountain biking, cross-country mountain biking, your position when you're sitting versus when you're standing versus when you're descending something steep, your arm angles vary quite a lot. But you'll really want to just make sure that your levers are never in a dangerous position. So that means in a critical spot, like when you're descending, you want to have your levers in a spot where it doesn't feel like you're having to roll your wrist forward down to grab that lever. If you with BMX, they're always standing up. The bikes are really short, and their shoulder down to their hand is basically a straight line down, unless they're pumping and rowing. And in that case, they never want to have their finger on their brake anyway, or their finger might be on the brake, but they're never going to use their brake anyway. Instead, the only time that they would want to use the brake, which in BMX you never do, but the only time that you would want to use your brake is if you are in some sort of like a turn scenario or something else, right? So for them, that they're really it's a totally different context. I run my levers more upright than most. There's a couple schools of thought here too. From the motocross side, there's a thought that you don't want to run your levers pointing too far down. Number one, it rolls your wrist forward. That puts you in a vulnerable wrist position, so that way your thumb actually takes too much of, if you were to land really hard, your thumb would be the only thing holding you on. And the concept is, if your wrist is actually kinked, if you were to fall down on the ground and land on your wrist, it's kind of designed to stop you like that better than if you were to fall down and land and your thumb was the only thing to catch you. That could hurt your thumb. But motocross riders typically ride with their levers more upright than mountain bikers do. And that is because you are spending so much time far back on the bike or forward in position. It is like a pretty wide variance. I am always running mine, on average, I run mine at 30 degrees. And that's from flat. So I guess what it would technically be like -30, I think. But 30 degrees from flat. And then mine vary though. And I've ran everything to 45 degrees. And then I've also ran everything to 20 degrees. And I am okay with that variance, but I do intentionally set mine up at 30. When I do a new bike, for example, I always set things up at 30. But then if I'm in a situation like single track 6 or Downeyville, for example, I might actually make my levers a little bit more upright. And then that makes it so that I can have some more control when it's extra steep. So yeah, there's probably a variance there, but that's why they set them up all different. If you do see your friend with the levers way down and it looks like they're having to roll their chest and shoulders really far forward and their wrists are forward to reach their brakes, do them a favor, loosen them up and tell them that they can lift them up. Their wrists will thank you. So,
and mark your brakes. Like if this is something that you ever take off, like you can just put I use like a paint pen or a Sharpie sometimes to know exactly where you want it. Like these things do matter. And so if you need to mark it because you're changing things, because you're testing things, that's totally valid as well.
Yeah, because I'm vain, I use a black Sharpie because I don't like it because I have black, components up there and I don't like that. But you can see the black Sharpie still, like in the light, But what I'll do is I make a line that goes across from my handlebar across the stem and then to the other side of the handlebar, like so that I can just see the line on the edges of the stem and then just see the line on the, like where the handlebar is right there. Because then that allows me to rotate my bar perfectly into place and never question. And then I also do the same thing on the levers. There's just like a small, very small line. And then that makes it so that it's really easy to line them up that way once you get them set. But you can use your phone as like the level to be able to figure out the degrees and handle it that way. And also it's worth saying, just while we're talking levers, move your levers inboard. You don't need on a mountain bike to have any more than one finger on the brake. And that one finger should be right toward where the lever has like a bit of a crook and it actually like picks up toward the end. Your finger should be nestled just to the inside of that or within that little bend. And that should be where your finger should be. So if they're too far out like that, you risk crashing, weird ergonomics, less brake power. Instead, adjust them so that your finger's right there. Okay. Carson's questions. This is going to be the last one. Carson dropped this down into the YouTube comments on last week's podcast, or I should say 2 weeks ago's podcast by the time this one publishes. Carson says, I'm 35, started seriously cycling and racing 3 years ago. I joined a team 2 years ago, and I have a 5, 2, and 1-year-old child. So, wow, that's 3 kids, all under 5. That's a lot. And a loving wife. I assume that you mean by the loving wife that she really takes up a lot of work. I assume that's what we're talking about here. I train 5 to 6:30 a.m. every day except Sunday and occasionally can accommodate an additional 1 to 1.5 hour ride at 8 a.m., depending on work schedule. I typically strength train 2 or 3 times per week in the afternoon, depending on work schedule, consisting of front squats, deadlifts, rows, planks, and push-ups. I sleep 6 to 8 hours per night, depending on kids waking, and tend to wake up on my own at midnight and 3 a.m. and occasionally struggle to fall back to sleep. And says in parentheses here, can't determine the reason. I try to follow nutrition strategies, and we'll get to that, by the way, the sleep thing. I try to follow nutrition strategies and love counting calories and macros. All that said, I've been at the same FTP for about 2.5 years, and that is roughly the same. What I'm seeing is like a fluctuation from like 251 to 267, Hannah, somewhere within there. And that's like year over year. It's been the same for the last 2.5 years. So, how can I tell if I'm getting better or need to change something up? I noticed that my FTP is in the 97th percentile of TrainerRoad athletes, but my race performance is in Colorado. It's mid-pack and time trials, crit, road race, and hill climbs. First of all, it's Colorado. If you are at the front of the pack in Colorado, you are you are very, very good. It's got to be one of the most competitive regions in the entire world for riding a bike. So give yourself a pat on the back, first of all. But then continues to ask, am I overdoing stress? I do generally feel tired, primarily reluctant to run around with the kids, but I don't think I'm overtrained. Am I just at my biological limit? I have considered genetics. My mom was an aerobic. Maybe it's a lack of youthful endurance sports. I played baseball, a lack of experience racing. Does it just take more time, like years? I love training indoors, especially when I consider convenience and safety. I love the process. However, I do wonder if I could change something to improve or optimize. Thanks. So I'm going to actually share my screen here so we can see what we're talking about and what we're looking at. All right, Hannah, you can see in this case, we have the career in front of us. We can see the athlete's career. We're going to look at their calendar. We're going to go through everything. You can see this athlete, it's no slouch. This athlete is at 260 watt FTP at 132 pounds or roughly 60 kilograms. That's 4.33 watts per kilogram, within the 97th percentile of TrainerRoad athletes there for FTP for hour power. That's a very, very fit athlete. 4.33 watts per kilogram is also quite elite. I know like somebody's listening to this and they're like, well, I heard that Tade is 6.7. Tade's Tade. 4.33 for an average athlete is up at the top. It's rare to have athletes above that. So with that in mind, we have mid-pack race performance. They want to improve that. Reporting a relatively stagnant FTP, wants to improve that race performance, and generally feels tired and lacks the energy to play with their kids. It's just wondering what's going on. So I went through this athlete's calendar the whole way through, but first I want to talk about the sleep stuff, and we're going to come back to that sleep stuff as well later on. The mid-sleep-wake events, have you ever struggled with this, Hannah?
I haven't struggled so much with, well, I'm curious where you're going to go with this. I haven't struggled so much with waking up in the middle of the night, but I do know that when I'm in a big overreaching phase, I struggle to fall asleep.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is what I'm in exactly in terms of where I'm getting at with this. I definitely think that training load and recovery has something to do with this. And we're going to get to this. I mean, the mid-sleep waking events, elevated cortisol, if you're training consistently in the evening or doing strength training in the evening, too close to bed, it does elevate cortisol. It can make it tougher to fall asleep. Also, if you're just going into and you're doing a lot of training, we're just going to look at this athlete's calendar, and there is absolutely, there's a lot of stuff and some extra things layered in pretty consistently throughout their training calendar. As a result, it's pretty easy to go hypoglycemic when you're asleep if you don't fuel enough. Your body uses a huge amount of carbohydrate when it trains, and then it's using a huge amount post-exercise as well. And that nocturnal hypoglycemia can make it so that you do have like stress hormones that spike, and then that makes you wake up, and it makes it really tough to get back to sleep. There's also just insufficient rest in general if in life makes it so that if you're like persistently in this sympathetic state, it makes it really tough to be able to ever get to the point where you can fully relax. So that's a bit of a precursor here. I do think that in some respects you're doing too much, and in other respects you're not doing enough. And we're going to kind of get into all the details by looking at the career here. So I'm going to look at a couple examples of what this athlete is doing well and then not doing well. And the main thing, or one of the main things, you are so diligent with your annotations. It's beautiful. I feel like I know you after going through your training calendar from 2023 through 2020. I'm ready to celebrate your birthday with you. Like I know everything about you. So, but I do want to point out some things here that I think are good signs of maybe overdoing things a bit. So we're looking at December 2023 and looking at this region here, and you started adding in strength training around this time frame. And when you started adding in strength training, I shouldn't say adding it in, but leaning into it a bit harder, and you start to report DOMs repeatedly coming up. And if you look at it, your training also got more intense around this time. And then you started also leaning into strength training, doing more or doing the same, but then your training was going up. and you're repeating DOMs pretty regularly. And it's cool to look back and see that TrainerRoad is picking up on the fact that like you needed to rest and you were getting yellow days and then you were still adding on extra. So it was giving you red days and it was trying to keep you away from doing too much. But the fact that I'm seeing DOMs referenced pretty regularly in this time period makes me think that maybe they're doing strength training a little too much. Hannah, how often do you experience DOMs, like from strength work in your training?
I feel like if I'm experiencing that, I've probably gone too hard.
Yeah.
It's not something that I feel like I really seek because cycling is the focus and I want those trainings to be the focus. And so when I experience DOMs, it's usually because I'm starting up strength training after a break of it, be it like the end of the season or maybe a long racing block, and I don't tone it down enough. And then I often do suffer because of that. Like you have DOMs, you're not going to be as strong in your next cycling workout, but you want to be. And so it becomes sort of this cycle of like, I can't get out of this. And so I don't know. DOMs is not, if I experience DOMs, it's because I've made an error.
Yeah, I think now you haven't mentioned that your goal is to increase your 1 rep max or your dead squat or your deadlift or your squat or something like that. So maybe that is the case and maybe you didn't just tell us about that. But otherwise, I would do less in the gym. Like not go so hard, not lift so much weight or do so many sets and so many reps. Like, you don't have to go so hard. And when you do that, it makes it tough, particularly when you start leveling up your training. And at this period in your training, you were doing like some pretty significant VO2 and anaerobic work, and it was really tough. You were also cherry picking some workouts here and dropping in some workouts that were like harder than they needed to be sometimes, not exactly in this phase, but in different points. All that means is that if you're doing really hard workouts, you need to think, oh, I need to carve out space in between these really hard workouts, then I can fully recover. But if you're throwing in a hard gym day in addition to that, which the good thing you're doing is at least you're doing it on the same day as your hard workouts instead of doing it during the rest days. But if you're doing that, you're only just making it tougher for yourself to recover for the next day. Your gym work should always be complementary. It shouldn't be something that stands in the way. Now, if you don't do any strength work and you're just getting into it, then yes, you'll probably experience some DOMs at first. But nobody ever said you need to do a really hard set to start out and you need to do a bunch of stuff. You can start with, I'm serious, I know this sounds silly, do a few reps of something and then just slowly build. And then you'll get to the point where it doesn't, it never impacts your training negatively. And then before you know it, you'll be to the point where you're doing moving a significant amount of weight. So that's one thing that I see there. But there's also a bit of a complication that I see when I'm looking at your training with adding in these extra endurance rides. Now, this week that we're looking at here is January of 2024, and this is the 8th through the 14th that we're looking at. With this in mind, I'm seeing a lot of these, like, these are like the hard days that you had, but then on top of that, you're throwing in 42 minutes up to an hour, but usually they're closer to a half hour. Or within a half hour and 45 minutes, you're throwing in these like easy rides. You're throwing them in early. You're doing a strength or you're doing a VO2 workout later, then you're doing strength in the evening. I see this tendency, Hannah, a lot where people will they want to add zone 2. That's the usually thing that I hear. So they're like, well, I'm just going to do an additional 30-minute workout during most days. I think that that's a fundamental misunderstanding. I think that if you're trying to add on zone 2 and get more time at that, it's probably more productive to do it when you have a day where you are intentionally trying to do zone 2. If you're adding it on in addition to a hard day and you're doing that consistently, you're likely standing in the way of recovery and adaptation processes that are going to be needing to happen. You're interrupting those because you're telling it, I need you to repair. I need you to repair. Then you're like, hold on, I'm going to give you a little bit more. Not enough to actually drive any sort of meaningful stimulus, not enough to drive any big change. I'm just going to interrupt your process. And then your body's like, okay, well, I guess should we go back to building now? Like that didn't give me any sort of marked stimulus that I need to get stronger or faster. That just stopped me from being able to recover. And then even you do that consistently, it's a great way to feel like you're doing more, but actually not getting a whole lot of juice for that squeeze. I don't know if you've seen this too with a lot of athletes, with these 2-a-days fitting in these short workouts like this.
Yeah, and I think sometimes there can be a place for it, maybe in like a very temporary fashion if this is, for a specific goal or something. But the other issue that I think is like one of the questions this person asked was, am I overtraining? And I think I don't know where we're going to go with this, but I always struggle sometimes with the word overtraining, but definitely under recovering. And these two
Yes.
things are different. And most people with 9 to 5 jobs and a family and all these responsibilities, it's a little difficult to overtrain because your life doesn't have enough space in it to do so much workout. But it's so easy to under recover. And so when I see these 2-a-days, I'm not even looking at it like, oh my gosh, you did so much exercise that day. But I immediately feel stress within myself because what I'm imagining is kidding up, training, unkidding, showering, kidding up, training, unkidding, showering. It's like, man, I mean, maybe you didn't shower in between, I don't know, but like how much time did you spend in the shower today? Like how many times did you put on your chamois? How many times did you put on chamois butter or what? Like all of these things. I mean, it's so silly, but truthfully, this adds stress and this leads to that idea of under recovering. And how much better would you be if instead of spending 45 minutes on the bike, aka an hour and a half of changing, showering, etc., and you just like sat down for a really good lunch? It's
Yes.
probably enhanced.
Yeah, I would agree, Hannah. We have a really hard time contemplating that. We think more is always better.
Mhm.
But I think that let's get to modern day now. Let's look at today. I think that you need to polarize your training a bit more, but that doesn't mean you need to do like I know there's polarized with a capital P, but to go to Hannah's point, you're not resting enough and you're seeking to make when it shouldn't be hard, you're making that harder. And then when it should be easy, forgive me, when it should be easy, you're making that harder. When it should be hard, you're not doing enough of the hard. Good example, if you look at a lot of these rides, you'll notice that whenever there's endurance work afterward, there's always extra. They're riding at a higher intensity and they're throwing in surges and little mini sprints. It's very common throughout their training. You can see this happening all the time. In my opinion, if I'm a coach, which I am, and I'm looking at this, I'm like, so you had a VO2 max workout on March 14th. You can see that this athlete struggled with these intervals, but then afterward, they were like, I'm going to throw on higher and aerobic work thereafter. If
No,
you struggled with the intervals and
it's
you weren't
drives
able
me
to do it,
crazy.
yeah, what would you suggest they do, Hannah? Yeah.
I mean, this is sort of the double-edged sword, right? Is looking at it as a coach, I'd be like, man, if you were still fresh, why don't you go harder in those intervals? Which may or may not be fair. Maybe they couldn't. But if you struggled with the intervals, it either means you didn't go hard enough, which means you shouldn't be able to do that, or you were so fatigued that you couldn't hit that high intensity, and therefore what we need is more recovery. So you shouldn't have pushed it after. So either one of these selections on our flow chart here did not result in you doing that high intensity after the intervals.
That's right. It's just not needed. And here's actually a great proof of this. Right now, here's what your current training schedule looks like. You have on Mondays, you're doing an hour and 15. Your second day of the week, an hour and 15 of hard intervals. Then the next day of the week, you're doing an hour 15 of easy. Then the next day, you're doing a hard group ride for an hour. Then the next day, you're doing an hour 15 of easy. Then you're doing, and these are not endurance. They're noted as easy ride. That is different. Like these are going to be lower endurance sort of rides. And what I see a lot of the time is that you elevate that or you pick a harder one and you ride a little bit higher. And then your fifth day of the week is hard intervals for an hour and 15 minutes. And then your sixth day of the week is just an hour 15 of endurance. This is what you have right now. But here's what TrainerRoad suggests for you. Ignore the fact that it's all scooted one day later on the week. We would just scoot it down because you said you don't train on Sunday. Instead, on the first day of the week, we have you doing hard intervals for an hour and 30 instead of an hour and 15. That is going to give you more time doing work, higher work, So then hopefully you aren't getting to the end of that workout and you're like, I'm going to throw in extra endurance. Hopefully you're just like, whew, that was enough. I don't feel like I need to do any more. Then look, your next ride, that easy ride, it's shortened. It's an hour instead of being at an hour 15. Then your next hard interval day is longer once again. It's at an hour and a half. And then your next easy day is even shorter. It's only 45 minutes. That should be the easiest of easy spins. And then on Saturday, it wants you to do 2 hours of intervals. And then on Sunday, which in this case, we'd scoot it all a day, it wants you to do 3 hours of endurance. This is really different than what your current training setup is. And what it's doing is it's trying to get you to do more high intensity work and then turn things way down on the low intensity side. But then on that last day of the week, it doesn't want you going out and doing just some random hard ride that you're doing outside. It wants you to do endurance, and it wants you to do it for 3 hours. So I think if I look at this has you right around somewhere around 500 TSS. And when I've looked back at this athlete's career, I can see inflection points where at first they were improving when they got the newbie gains. They were improving with like 400 to 410 TSS a week. And since then, you've been fluctuating somewhere within 300 to 600. And when you're able to hold 600 for something like 5 or 6 weeks, guess what? FTP goes up. And you can see that in time periods with those little black dots on their account here. It starts to tick up. But in this case, if you did 500, because not all TSS is the same, if you did 500 with this sort of neat structure where your easy work is truly easy, you're doing more interval work, meaning that like the intervals that you're doing more of them, you are going to see a pronounced improvement, especially with that longer weekend ride of 3 hours. So if you do that, I think that you will stop seeing that change that you have there. The only thing that I would suggest, like Hannah said, going back to your circumstances, you've got a lot going on in your life. So with all that you have going on in your life, I might look at dropping one of those easy days that you have and making it just a full rest day.
That's
If you
exactly
feel
what I
like
was
you
gonna
can't,
say.
yeah, if you feel like you can't do enough, that Friday, and at least when I'm looking at this calendar here, it would be your Thursday if we shift everything a day. It might be a great day to just take the day off. And if you do that, I think that you'll be, this system right here is, if you can maintain this from a training perspective and see the sort of improvements you need. But from a life perspective, if something gets difficult, let Friday drop and don't add anything extra. Don't add extras. And if you commute, by the way, I saw the commutes as well. I think this is a good rule of thumb. Try to keep your commutes at 50% FTP or less. I know that's hard if you're late and you're trying to get there quick. So, but like I see a lot of commutes that are somewhere between 0.75 and 0.85 or 0.9. And it's short. It's like 20 minutes long, 15 minutes long, but that's hard. And that's really going to interrupt your recovery and adaptation process. So takeaways, you're incredible with your annotations. Continue that. The other thing that I want to mention is the fact that you're striving to make things hard when they should be easy. And then you're not doing enough of the truly changing work, those intervals. If you start to actually make the easy stuff as easy as it should be, it will become easier for you to be able to do all of that hard work that will move the needle. And then those weekend rides, that endurance ride, should be longer, somewhere around 3 hours. So those are the things that I'm seeing here with this athlete. Hannah, I don't know if you have any other additional thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was a beautifully analyzed consensus. I think the only thing I would add is just the general emotion of cut yourself some slack. Like Jonathan has said, you've got a lot going on. Riding from 5 a.m. to 6 a.m. is hard. Takes a lot of discipline and mental energy and dedication and desire to get up that early and to do that training every day. You're amazing. Congratulations. That is so, so cool. Also, if you feel tired, like Jonathan said, it's okay to hit the alarm and snooze every now and then. This will not completely disrupt all your training. Pick the right days. Pick the right workouts, and it's only going to help you continue to move the needle by listening to your body.
Yeah, well said. Take all that energy that you have that you're putting into your training and cut a good portion of that away from training and allocate it toward recovery. Put all that energy into recovery. So, if that's and a great way to do it is with your kiddos and finding time to run around with the kiddos. Maybe that's looking like I don't know, going out and throwing a ball with the kids, or going out and doing something. I don't know, maybe you watch a show with the kids, something like that. But like, start to put your energy into that too, and take away from the training though. Take away from some of the training and put it into that. And I bet that you'll find that you actually get more for less. It's kind of wild how that works. But if we aren't giving our body enough space to recover, it simply can't do the task. But thanks for sending this in. Fantastic. You're an incredible athlete. Very well done. There's also examples of us normies out there that are not at like that sort of level all the time. And we can learn a ton from your accounts too. If you want us to take a look at your TrainerRoad account, give it an audit, find ways for you to improve, run through, we can do that. Just let us know. Send it into the YouTube comments down below. If you haven't used TrainerRoad, it makes you faster. It can give you a custom training schedule just like that for that athlete. If you haven't followed Hannah on Instagram, you totally should. Go follow her, and then go say hi at races like y'all did at Sea Otter. I know Hannah mentioned she got to speak to a lot of you, which is pretty cool. And Hannah, I guess we'll have you back. I'm not sure if we have another one already scheduled. I think we do. I think we don't.
I don't know. I was going to say, I think we need to schedule. So.
Okay, cool. We'll look at it. We'll see how your Unbound build is going. And if you want to do that, or we'll do it post Unbound. Thanks everybody for listening to the podcast. We'll talk to you next week. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.